to Future Weekly, the startup podcast with me, Daniel, and as ever with
Markus.
And this episode is quite a special episode because this is number one, the first one we've ever held in English, so we'll stay in English. And number two, it's the first one we ever held live with an audience because we had the opportunity to do this in the midst of the great Entrepreneurship Avenue, interviewing none other than Travis Pittman, live on stage of Tour Radar. So yeah, we're curious what you think about this. As ever, give us feedback at podcast@austrianstartups.com or on Discord. And I'd say without any further ado, let's switch to the show.
That's lovely. You all good? That's actually not bad. I give you, from a scale from shit to 10, I'll give you an 8. How about that? That's an 8, I'd say.
Yeah, for after lunch, it's not
I
bad.
think after lunch. Yeah, that's what they call the graveyard shift in speaking terms. So, you know, in graveyard shift, meaning like everyone's happily fed, slightly relaxed, and goes, just shut up and entertain me. So we'll do that. Who of you is following our podcast? Raise your hand. Good. Who of you is not following our podcast? Raise your hand. Who of you has no opinion? Good. So we've got 30% loyal viewers. The other 70% will try and convince now, so we're going to do our best. Who of you is easily offended? Raise your hand. Good. This is going to be good. Yeah, you can then go outside and look at Bambi. It's going to be great. So we'll do our best to have fun, which we'll do. Should we just kick right in? Yeah. How do we do that, actually?
I love that you have a blank piece of paper.
Yeah, that's my preparation.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out,
That's
Travis.
right, yeah.
It's always great that you
Well prepared. Yeah?
share my trade secrets. It's actually what I call the method is driven by curiosity. At the end of the day, there's going to be full.
Okay.
So no pressure on that. Markus, are we going to start this like a traditional recording? Or we started already?
I think we already started.
That's awesome.
Let's jump right in.
Okay, so the idea is to create a live podcast. The Future Weekly podcast is essentially a podcast which started with Markus and myself having a telephone call about what was going on in innovation land. And it was initially a 5-minute call, a 10-minute call, a 20-minute call. And after some time, it was like an hour call. And we were like, holy shit, either we have to stop because it's quite cold, or we'll create a podcast.
Cool.
That's what we did. And that's 182 episodes by now.
Correct.
182 episodes, so we're getting old. It was like pre-pandemic, we used to meet in person. And today we have a great guest. And yeah, you heard James' intro. Mm-hmm. So, Travis, I was just saying the last time we met was actually together with Jessica Alba and lots of beer, right? Oktoberfest.
Yeah.
Bits and Pretzels. The funny thing was we were at an after-show party at Bits and Pretzels. Who of you's been to Oktoberfest? Out of interest. Yeah, so it's like shit until you get drunk, right? Yeah. Essentially.
Basically.
And I wasn't aware of that. And I was stone sober and you popped up and I think you gave me the advice to
Have a few.
How did you know that?
So, being Australian, we hear about Oktoberfest on the other side of the world, and it's about beer. Australians like beer. And so, yeah, basically, it's very well known, and it's a bit of a rite of passage that if you're Australian, you come to Europe, at some stage, you should attend Oktoberfest. So, yeah. And
when did that start?
what? Oktoberfest?
No, the Australian part.
The Australian part?
Yeah.
When I was born?
No! This is going really well, isn't it? So you were born Australian, okay,
Yeah.
thank you. No, I was curious because I always understood like Oktoberfest is about a bunch of Australians getting wasted, and that must have started somewhere. Like, I think there's a mountain where they all lie, right?
Yeah, basically. You know, so it's since the early 70s, it's been a bit of an expat thing. So Aussies went to London, they could get a working holiday visa, and then they travel around Europe. And so it was about early 70s, I think it was really a thing, and then by early 2000s, when I went over there, it was literally tens of thousands of Aussies, Kiwis there, and then it was like, okay, let's do Oktoberfest, let's go to Tom and Tina, let's go to Running of the Bulls, you know, all of those kind of iconic events that you hear about that you want to experience, you know, firsthand. So
yeah, and I really appreciated your insight knowledge there. Yeah. It was great. Let's take a step back. We just kind of roughly heard what you do. If I pull up on LinkedIn, it says you're the CEO of TourRadar, right? So just tell us in your own words, what does TourRadar do?
What does TourRadar do? So we're a booking platform connecting people to organized travel adventures. So think of a safari in Africa, think about hiking and trekking, possibly in Tanzania, going and swimming with the marine animals in Ecuador, whatever it is that's a little bit difficult to work out how to do. We connect you with the best people and the best organizers who actually pull that together. So it's a place to come, search, book, and make it easy for people to get away. So, yeah.
How do you explain to a taxi driver when he or she wants to know what you do for a living?
I just sell travel.
You sell travel?
Yep.
Okay, which brings me to quite an interesting story. When we actually met the first time was 10 years ago, I think, 12 years ago. 12, holy shit, in Spengergasse, which used to be like a co-working space before we actually knew what co-working spaces were as such. It's basically a bunch of startups in the same office. And you were like basically a one-man show, plus your brother who's on the other side of the world running this whole TourRadar thing. And we kind of had our first talk, and then, I don't know the exact order, but you started a business in Austria as an Aussie, mastering the German language at that point in time. Ish. And the Austrian bureaucracy, but it was. We've got one person with humor. That's awesome.
Yep. There'll be more.
Yeah, we'll work on that. But I'm curious. Take us even a couple of steps backwards. Like, where did your entrepreneurial, how should I say, eagerness start? How did you get to Austria? What's the whole story behind that?
So I think it actually began, if I really take it back, my parents were both entrepreneurs themselves. They actually were from Sydney. They did a round Australia trip, ended up in Darwin, which for those who don't know, it's at the top of Australia. And they basically were driving around in a four-wheel drive and exploring the whole of Australia, so taking adventures. So I think that was kind of instilled in me from very early on. They were builders and interior designers and things like that. And I think my brother and I wanted to do something a little bit similar, where we took things into our own hands. And in London, my brother came over first. Then I came over in 2004. And we had a bit of a meeting of minds of what we could do. We both loved the internet. We both loved traveling. And I always say that if you can combine your passions into something that you do, then that's obviously the best of both worlds. So started to have a go at that. And then in 2005, I was traveling as well in Barcelona and met my now wife, and she's Austrian, so which is how I ended up here in Vienna. And then I moved here in 2006, roughly. So that's kind of the personal story. And then 2010, we actually founded TourRadar, and that was in Australia. 2013, we founded a GmbH here in Austria, and that was where a few challenges came up along the way. So
you said you were passionate about traveling, and you said you wanted to take matters into your own hand. But how did you get to this idea of starting TourRadar? I think that's where it's often difficult and people get lost, but how did you make this first step?
So the predecessor to TourRadar was another website which we created called Bug Bitten. So to be bitten by the travel bug, it's an English expression that people once said bitten, they just keep traveling. They just keep wanting to doing things. And we were like a photo sharing site in London, kind of like Facebook and Instagram, for all the expats living there. So we were getting, in 2005, 20,000 photos a day being uploaded.
Wow.
And that was of drunken photos, but also a lot of traveling photos. So it was a good mix of things that we saw on there. But where we got to that, so to answer your question, was I wanted to do something. Like, I really wanted to connect the dots between my passion for the internet and to be able to make some money out of it and to be able to do something for myself. And so I'm an engineer, mechanical engineer by trade, so I was working a day job in London, getting paid quite well, but I also wanted to eventually do something on my own. And so on the side, I started to look at how do I do this, how could I code HTML, all that kind of stuff. And I had a website for myself for my own photos, which back then, 2004-05, was unheard of, to have your own website. And I was at a pub in London, and I had 4 people come up to me in the pub and say, can you do me a website like that? Because I really want to share my photos with my friends back in Australia. Because this is still when there was dial-up internet. So a lot of you probably don't even know what that is. Extremely slow internet, basically. And so that was how the idea, and I said, excuse the language, but fuck it, I'm going to just try to do this myself. And so then I just, at home, on weekends, at night times, started to just work out how to do it. Found some developers in Ukraine, actually, who actually started to help make that a reality, and actually to do the hard part. Because I actually got a coding book. I bought a PHP coding book. I started like 10 pages in, I went, oh, no, okay, I got to find someone who can actually do this for me. I'm not going to be able to learn it, so, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah?
Definitely. Yeah. So you had the website. What happened to get to TourRadar? Because that's still a long way, I see.
Mm-hmm. We bootstrapped too long, and so for those who don't know what bootstrapping is, it's doing things yourself without getting additional funding, so basically funding it from your own savings or your own job. And back then, so 2004-05, there was none of this. There was not the VC scene. There was really not really any support for this type of, for startups, really. So Sean and I, so my brother, he's the co-founder, he's the CFO. We bootstrapped it too long in hindsight. At the time, it felt right. We were like, oh no, we've got to hold on to as much equity as we can. We don't want to let investors come in and we have to give away 10, 20, 30% of the company. So there was a bit of that greed sort of feeling of, okay, I don't want to give stuff away. But very quickly, and it was actually in Spengergasse where I realized it, was you're sitting there and there was other startups around, and I was just looking at it going, I'm a one-man show, here. My brother's back in Australia. But I saw all these other startups with 3, 4, 7, 12 people, and it just clicked to me that, hey, I need people to actually achieve what I want to achieve. I can't do all this myself. And I think then I realized, well, we have no revenue, so we can't pay anyone, so I guess we need to get investors to help us pay for that. So that was where, in Spengergasse, I met Oliver Holler, who's the founder of Speed Invest, met Sebastian Heinzel, who was the founder of Tripwolf, and Stefan Kaltais. So basically in that little group, I then got the first angel investment, and also a guy I met at, I don't know if is it called Vienna Startups? Vienna, where the events, the pitching events that first started in Sector 5. Do you remember what they were called? Chan, and I think
that was actually Austrian startups.
Was it Austrian startups?
That was our Stammtische.
So I think it was one of the very first ones. So I pitched there, and I actually pitched, and there was a guy in the audience. He's from Syria. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, I really like your idea. He's literally the only one who came up. No one else did. And he's like, let's have a chat. And he ended up investing. So he was the very first investor.
That's awesome.
And it actually came from there. And then because he put in Sebastian, Stefan, and a few others came in around that. So,
I mean, here's the funny thing. First of all, how did you get to Spengergasse? I just like to, maybe the explanation is like Spengergasse was like the epicentrum back in the day. It was like, but it was also the only place of startups. Like anyone outside of that room probably had no fucking clue what a startup was. No. And how did you end up there? You're just looking for a desk.
No, I actually, I remember, this is hilarious. This is a really, so, Oberösterreich, so Upper Austria, there's a little town called Timokam. I don't know if anyone knows it. No? It's near Vöcklerbruck, so Attersee sort of area. And I was literally in there and with school friends of my wife, tiny little Gasthaus Basel thing.
Yeah.
Got talking to Simon. I don't know if you remember Simon.
Yeah.
With the glasses.
Lachinger.
Yeah. And he was working for Tripwolf.
Fuck.
And got talking to him, then got connected, and then I think I came into Spengergasse, and that's where I got to know Nico and Alex and Sebastian, and then I started to help Alex with Travel Audience and Tripwolf and everything like that. So, yeah.
Because the thing is, what you just mentioned was Jan. Jan is one of the co-founders of Austrian Startups. Basically, what we did was, in the Spengergasse, was after work, we would just decide to have a talk, how it was kind of going. And at the same time, there was also the opportunity to potentially present the business you were building. And we kind of did that 2 or 3 times, and more people started showing up, more people being like 20 or 30 people. And then eventually that was actually the start of the first pre-Austrian startup Stammtisch. And you were then one of our visitors, and we used to meet and just network on that. So then you kind of decided, okay, you founded the company in Australia and also decided to found a GmbH, as you so nicely put, in Austria. And I remember then, the next thing I heard of you was like, we did have the odd conversation, but the next thing I heard was that some Austrian law kind of looked at the venture you were running and said, okay, we'll have to put it into a box because that's what they love doing. And they went like, okay, obviously this is a travel agency, a Reisebüro.
Yep.
And they said, good man, we don't care what you do, you need to take the test.
Correct.
For Reisebüro in German.
In German.
Not speaking German.
No.
I remember, I think I was like, man, he's fucked. And then the next thing I heard was said, okay, you'll have to learn German to take that test. How did that go?
So
it's horrible.
yeah, it was at the Wifi in St. Pölten, so I had to go out there every day. There was 30 people who were signed up for it. It was a 3-week course, I think it was. And I'd heard horrible stories of, it was like 5 people would pass, basically. And I was like, well, I don't
And they were fluent in German.
And they were Austrian, so and I was like, well, I'm fucked. Like, so I'm not going to be part of that 5. And I had to learn accounting, legal, I had to do everything, and I actually do not know to this day how I passed. Like, literally, I was there, and they're reading out the people who would pass, and I literally had switched off because I'm like, I'm not going to be the one coming up to get a certificate or whatever it was. And they said my name, and I literally just like froze. I was like, what? No, that can't be the case. But it was. Somehow I passed, and I then was able to practice as a travel agent. And clearly, yes, we sell travel, and yes, the business is like a travel agent, but it doesn't fit into a box. And it definitely is an area. I was part of working groups with the government and with different things to talk about how do we have a sandbox for different grey area Gewerbe, because a lot of you, I'm sure, are developing ideas that just don't fit into a box. I mean, that's why you're developing the ideas, is to break out of those boxes. And I think it was really, really tough to get through that.
I remember reading that and hearing that from you. It was just like the dumbest idea, but I mean, it was all jokes aside. I mean, that was a critical moment for your venture, right? If you would not have passed, that would have been end of story.
There would have been a way. I would have had to pay someone to be my, I don't know what the word is.
Schattengeschäftsführer?
No, what's the trade? The trade managing director. I don't know what that is in German.
Yeah, gewerberechtlicher Geschäftsführer.
That one.
Yeah.
Yep. So
I bet the exam went really well.
So I would have had to have paid someone to be that, represent that, it just would have been a lot harder.
Yeah.
So,
Got it, Markus. We just...
Yeah, no, I really like the story because it often gives this impression that we just talk to politicians and we make things much worse than they are. But it's such a prime example of an international founder coming to Austria, having to learn German to do a test that has nothing to do with his actual business. It's a perfect example where things need to change. One question still. When was the moment that you quit your job?
It was, if I remember this right, 2004.
When did you know that it was the time to do that?
So, it's an interesting question because this is flying around now. It's probably a segue to the next part of the conversation, but there's this talk about product market fit. So, where have you started to succeed? Have you actually got something? And it was with Bugbitten at the time that I was doing this on weekends, in the evenings, and I literally had made business cards that would walk the streets and just hand it out to people, and that was kind of our guerrilla marketing that we did. And it was when user growth, and I was actually holding parties in London where I had 500 people come to a place in Covent Garden for Australia Day, and I was literally there just going, okay, there's kind of something here, clearly. And I think it was at that moment, and also seeing 20,000 photos a day being uploaded and this whole ocean basically there to be taken for digitizing what we were doing, basically. It was at that point I just went to my boss, and he was an Aussie as well, and he was, I won't say jealous, but I think he was like, I really would love to be in your shoes to be able to do the same journey, but he's gone on to create his own thing now as well. But I think it was just like, okay, no, go for it. You can always fall back on this, obviously. And I think that's I've heard a couple of times recently, like, you should just think of different phases as experiments. And I think if you have an education or you've done a job or if you've had something, you're not throwing everything on the line, really. Like, it may seem like you are, but you're not. Like, you should be a fallback plan. And so with me, I knew I could fall back, and I had to do that, actually. So I had to actually do a consulting job in 2010 when everything was pear-shaped in Ukraine. So I was actually in Donetsk, which is where everything's kind of happening right now. I did a 8-week consulting job there to pay the bills, to actually be able to continue on the Tour Radar journey. So it was having that confidence that I could always fall back to something and not think I'm going to be literally on the streets if I don't do this. So, no.
What was the first iteration of Tour Radar? What was the initial idea?
First iteration was actually more like a meta search. So for those like who know Kayak or Skyscanner, you go, you search, but then you click out to a website like Expedia or somewhere and you actually book it with them. So that was the same concept. We said, hey, let's aggregate all the tour operators in the world into this search engine and then click out to the tour operator to book it with them. So that was the first version.
How did that go?
It was a stepping stone.
Yeah.
It was semi-successful. Like, we actually did a partnership with Lonely Planet, with Rough Guides, with a few pretty big companies where they listed our iframe or search engine on their site. Problem is, it was attribution. I don't want to go down this hole, but cost per click, you need to show a return on the investment to the advertiser. And the tour operators were so archaic back then, and to some degree now, some are still. They didn't understand that a click would convert into an inquiry and then into actually a booking. And so we were constantly justifying ourselves that we were driving them quality traffic. And that was the next iterations of that, where we went to a cost per lead version. Also a nightmare, and then we realized we had to own the customer. So in the end of the day, that's where we said, okay, booking. And at that time, I managed to convince one of the founding members of Expedia, so Eric Blatchford. He was in Europe for a conference, and I went up to him after he gave a talk where he literally said, one day there'll be a booking.com of adventure. And I kind of was like, okay, I've got to go up and talk to this guy. And went up to him, and yeah, basically he said, look, send me your details. We connected, and then he came on as an investor, and he was the one who converted us from this, lead gen model to actually a booking model. And that was the moment that Oliver Holler finally saw there was something in this. So before that, I was pitching him on all this other stuff, and he was like, yeah, not going to work, not going to work. And then once I got Eric, and once we said we were switching to the booking model, he basically then was like, this is interesting.
How long did you talk with Oliver? Or what time frame?
Probably 9 months. Yeah, something like that.
Because, I mean, I find that there's a couple of things in there. And I have to admit, the first time I heard of Tour Radar, it was like, yeah, okay, I don't get it. Yep. It was initial conversation, 2000, I don't know what it was, 10, 11. I didn't quite understand it. Nowadays, I think it's super smart. It's a great concept. But initially, it was like, no, I don't understand it. I'm assuming a lot of the market reacted that way. Yeah. What I find so intriguing is that you're saying, okay, you happen to be at the right place at the right time, knowing you, that was probably prepared, right? Knowing you. Because the funny thing is, like, when I think back, and I don't mean it in a negative way, but I've always had the feeling that you would just be everywhere and just pop up, like randomly pop up. And you were just there, just you popping up, being there, right time, right place. That's hard work. And then getting the pass and then killing it. How do you get to that opportunity? You just say, well, he said it on stage and you walked up and you pitched it and done. That's not easy. How do you frame that? Were you aware he was going to be there?
No, And I didn't know about him before. I didn't know. And the interesting thing about that whole part was it was in Zurich. No, sorry, it was in Lucerne. And that day, I had a meeting with an investor, so who was in travel before, and I took a train up to Zurich, went there, went into his office, pitched, went absolutely horribly. Like literally, it was one of the worst meetings I've had with an investor.
Why?
He just basically, to me, didn't show any respect whatsoever, or even to show any interest to try and understand what we were wanting to achieve.
Now I'm interested, how did he show that?
I don't know, just basically...
Did he kind of do his nails?
Yeah,
or?
basically, and just random, just questions for the sake of questions, not really understanding what we're doing, just wanting to cut me down in every possible way. It was the feeling I got, maybe completely different. Walked out, completely dejected, like literally just wanted to come back to Vienna, but I was like, no, I've got to go back to this conference, and where I've got to be positive and full of energy and meet people, and I'm literally on the train back to Lucerne, and I get this SMS from one of the team members I had there, and they're like, oh, there's this guy speaking at this event, and he's just like talking about how the booking.com of adventure travel will be there one day. And I was like, shit, I've got to get there before the end of his talk. And so I basically had to run from the train station to the hall where he was actually speaking, and then got there just for the end of it, and just timed it basically to walk up as he's basically finishing up.
Okay, I love that. I didn't know. There was two or three things I'd just like to follow up on that. Number one, you said, I had to be positive and full of energy.
Yeah.
That's the way I've always met you. But I'm liking that you kind of put your game face on, that you know you have to. How do you make that work when you just got dejected, had a shit meeting?
Yep.
How do you make it work?
I think that's just, if you're an entrepreneur, you've got to do that in every sense. I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about it a bit. The last 2 years have not been fun. So you've got to put on a game face and you've got to be positive. But I think it's, I mean, you can't just sit around and feel sorry for yourself either if you want to achieve something. So
I like that. Yeah. And the other thing I liked so much was that you have, and we'll talk culture in a second, but I love the fact that you had a team member call you, say, look, here's a tremendous opportunity, come along and deliver. And I like it so much that they are hunting for the opportunity for you, that they call you, that you come. There's a lot until that works. I've actually not heard of that before, someone doing that. Tell us, how do you build a team like that? No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. To build the team, I think you've got to start somewhere with, and this sort of really goes back to the principles, but core values. So finding people who really align with who you are, actually, and who you want the company to become, and what do you want to do with it. And that was something super early. Like we were like 7 people where we actually first defined our core values. And we had too many. I mean, you'll probably, if you're doing it now, you'll probably have like 10, 12 core values. You got to whittle it down to 4 or 5. They have to be memorable, basically. But yeah, so, and you've got to use those core values in your hiring and how you actually live those. Like if you can live them on a daily basis and other people can also see how they can, or actually that's just inherently who they are, then that's when you start to build that team around you. Yeah.
How did you hire for those values? How did you check that?
I think there's a lot of intuition you have in the early days, like just of that gut feeling. And they say gut feeling's not great in all senses, but honestly, I found for up to about 100 people, it is true, especially, and that's what I did every final interview for the first 100 people. And then I knew I was a bottleneck, basically. So then had to define a set of questions and kind of answers of how I viewed different answers, so that people could see how I thought. If someone said this to this question, that's the way I interpreted it. And obviously that's not the only way, but that was just how I would. And so defining those things very clearly and explicitly, I think helps not just you, but also people earlier in the hiring funnel trying to filter out the people who are not going to be aligned or you know, who believe in the vision or culturally fitted into the vision that you want to do. But I think it really starts early in that hiring process. And there's got to be a sort of final check, I feel, at the end of that process before someone comes in and starts. Yeah.
You mentioned employee 100 now, and
yep.
Until then you were really involved. If I remember back to the time when I actually took over as managing director at Austrian Startups, which was end of 2016,
mm-hmm.
TourRadar was really the #1 startup in Austria. It was like, you know, there's this trend ranking and everybody was talking about TourRadar and everybody wanted to work for TourRadar.
Mm-hmm.
How did that feel for you from the inside? How did you manage your ego? How did you go along with the emotion that also comes from being on top of the world?
I think it is the challenge of success. It really is to keep yourself grounded. And I think if you hire the right people around you, you actually can keep grounded in that way, where you have people who will start to say, hey, you're being a bit of an idiot, you know, you shouldn't really be thinking that way or talking that way, and I think that's helpful to have that kind of, not validation, but just people who can actually speak honestly to you. And I think now, like, I've got my leadership team, I've got 4 people in it who have been with us for 8 years now. So it's a really strong, like, very honest, like, team where there's no bullshit between us, like, you know. So I think it's just having people to call you out on that. And also the other co-founder was my brother. So we're completely, yeah, like, honest with each other, and we've had a lot of really, you know, good disagreements and haven't spoken to each other for days at a time, but I think blood definitely keeps you together. And I know Mum wouldn't be happy if there was a day that we went and said, oh, we're not talking to each other now because of this. So I think you always find a way with that. But yeah, coming back to the feeling of keeping yourself grounded, it's exciting. I think it's really exciting. Like, when you feel that things are going great, but this is actually an expression I use. I actually don't know who said it or where it comes from, but it's this too shall pass. And it is so relevant because it's when 2017, things going amazing, it's going to pass. It's going to pass. There will be shit times ahead, but those shit times are going to pass as well. And I think if you always think in that mindset of this is dynamic, you'll know that there's always, the shit times are not going to last forever, and the good times are not going to last forever either. So don't get on top of your ego and actually think, I'm going to be king of the world forever. So I think that's kind of the way you try and keep yourself in check a little bit, or the way I did anyway. Yeah.
That's a great point, this too shall pass. I mean, the funny thing is, like, I mean, obviously we're going to talk about shit times in a second, because obviously we're leading up to that.
Yep.
But just out of interest, I mean, we have a lot of aspiring and young entrepreneurs, and I think there's, for a lot of them, like, the first time you make kind of money, there's this picture of what you do and how life is. How did you experience that, and how was it different to what you expected it would be when you were like 20, 25?
Yeah, I think what I actually learned to become, so I think you asked me when did I want to quit my job, or so when did I decide to quit my job? I think at that time when I first started, I was very naive in terms of my motivations and aspirations for why I wanted to do this. And I'm not going to lie, there was it was material. It was actually to make a lot of money. Like, I want to be successful because money does help you do cool stuff. Like, so it allows you to travel more, it allows you to do things.
What's the dumbest thing you did with money?
Dumbest thing?
Yeah. You do something really stupid? Come on, you did a shit ton of stupid things. I'm seeing that, just that grin is like, man, the list is so long.
No.
Tell me later. Come on, give us a bit of a taste for something where you go like, yeah, I was like young and stupid. It's probably a shit ton of ideas.
it involves, there's alcohol, like for sure. Like, so buying too much alcohol, or it was, yeah, there's been some times where you're like, I really shouldn't have done that. But at the time it seemed really fun and like, yeah, but
it seemed like the appropriate thing to do
Yep.
until you got sober.
Yes.
Yeah.
exactly.
That's
yeah.
a friendly way of putting it. I mean, it's early.
Yeah, it's early. Yeah, there's no beer on the table yet, so yeah. But
We should I've been telling Marcus we should do this kind of later in the evening at some point in time involving whiskey. So once we get that sorted, you're coming back.
done. All right, good.
We'll do that. Anyhow, but back to the misconception. So because, I mean, the thing is, like, people think you make a shit ton of money and suddenly life is tremendous and everything's easy because you have money.
No, and I think what I've come to realize is that, and I think it's as you go through that journey is, yeah, you should also be very realistic in what you're going to pay yourself, and you should not be greedy and go, I've got product market fit now, so now I need to pay myself this amazing salary and whatever else. I think it's always in line with where your company is at, the funding you've got, all that kind of stuff has to be considered. And it took a while before we started to even pay ourselves a decent salary, like a really long time.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not joking, like there was points where I was so strapped in for cash here that I was going to Billa and I knew that I had like €6.46 in my bank account, and so I knew that I needed to get €6 worth of stuff, like, so, and actually calculating. So this is not that long ago, like that it was like that. So I think you appreciate money, and then once you start to get it, yes, you do probably overspend sometimes extravagantly on some things, but I think it's learning the value of that has really made me appreciative now when you do have a bit more, that yeah, you make use of that better, I'd say. Yeah.
It's an elegant way of not answering the question.
You're welcome.
Love you, brother. Marcus.
We touched the bad times now already a few times. Obviously, the last 2 years with Corona for a travel company were tough. Walk us through these first few days when you realized this is gonna hit us hard.
Yeah, so the first few days, so it was our CMO, Christian, wrote a message in Slack January 15th or something like that. And he wrote, I've got a feeling this COVID thing could be a bit of a problem. Like, and we're like, whatever, like, sure. It's just a virus thing, it'll go away. And yeah, we all know the story, but it'd been a really busy time over Christmas and into January, and we just had our record January month, and I was done, like, you know, so I needed a break. So I went to Egypt, did my PADI scuba diving course, 5 days, I think, just doing nothing. I switched off everything. Like, literally, I had no connection to anything, like no digital stuff, just took books. I got to Sharm el-Sheikh airport on the way back, and I thought, I'll turn on everything, and I went to CNN.com first, and that's where it was like, stock market plummeting, Italy, you know, COVID outbreak, blah, blah, blah. This is the 26th of February, I think it was the date. And it was a Friday or Thursday, and yeah, I was like, oh shit, okay. All of those great feelings, that relaxed feelings, the aspirations of raising a big round in 2020, we're on a great path, we're gonna, you know. And then I wrote to the leadership team in Slack and said, I guess we're meeting tomorrow then. And it's like, yeah. So that's where it kind of all basically kicked off from then, and it was daily, basically, you know, war room type meetings to work out what we were going to do from that point on. But yeah, I think that's the lesson, and I mean, there's a whole world out there right now starting to change in the tech world and everything too. And there's some companies going to start going through some pretty tough crisis right now. And it's just that quick decision making, I think, was really essential. And we got to the point where we were having also daily board meetings, so with our investors. And that was stressful. I mean, a board meeting every quarter is stressful, let alone every single day. Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, I remember saying to my wife, like in the early days of COVID, we were talking, and it was obviously quite dim for all of us. And I remember mentioning Radar to her and saying, look, there's this company that's been going really well, and I've been a big fan of the company, and always kind of keeping an eye on, because you obviously, I remember talking to you in the early days, and obviously you became one of the people I looked up to because you scored against the All Blacks playing touch rugby for Austria, which is tremendous. I've never met anyone who's scored playing rugby against the All Blacks, which is
22-1. It was
incredible. But you got the one,
yeah.
so that's incredible. So no, seriously, I mean, scoring against the All Blacks that's like playing soccer against Brazil or whatever it is.
Scoring, yeah.
Yeah, scoring, right? Markus knows more about volleyball than I do. No, soccer. Sorry. Tremendous. And then I remember saying to her, like, holy shit, like, imagine you're running a travel company. And you're probably prepared for some crisis in one part of the world, losing 10, 20, 30% of your business. But how the fuck do you have a contingency plan for a global pandemic? Mm-hmm. You don't.
You don't. No.
So how do you, from there on, how do you pick yourself up and go, okay, well, fuck, we don't know what's happening. Revenue is probably going down to zero. No one's going to be traveling for the next month or years. Mm-hmm. And our business is travel. How do you take it from there?
Yeah, I think this is where team really counts and where culture really comes to its forefront, because everyone realized that we were in a very prickly situation, and I think ownership really started to take hold where clearly we could not be everywhere, because if you think there was everything from tour operators, we were like, are they going to go bust? What are the cancellations going to go through? We had, literally tens of thousands of bookings that were out there, and that's a lot of millions of revenue, basically, and also cash, and customers, they're calling, and they're wanting to know what's with their money, what are they going to do? And so we found that there was pockets within the company that started to just take on certain initiatives, and one was what we call this credit for future tours. So basically to say that if you have a tour that needs to be cancelled, we could offer them a credit, or a voucher, basically, rather than actually just giving a refund. And if customers wanted a refund, we would, but we also said, hey, you do want to travel at some stage, so please take a credit. And that was owned by a small group of people within the organization, not in the leadership team, but that was driven forward, that initiative. And that was just one thing amongst many. Like, think about the finance side with, and also the people, so HR side, Kurzarbeit, all these subsidies. We had different pockets of people trying to, and so it comes back to these people within the team taking ownership, so that you don't feel I need to be every single area. Like, I literally was waking up every single morning, and there was just like update after update after update of, this is the shit that's hitting the fan, but this is either the solution or this is what we're doing to find a solution. So it was kind of, that was how we tried to keep everything moving during that time. Yeah.
Psychologically, how did you deal with that? How did you sleep? And
badly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Horrible.
What did you do to get through it?
So, yeah, it was really bad. Like, it was, I'm talking 2-3 hours a night type sleep, and that sleep was not quality sleep either. So the thing that I did, and I still do it today, is get outdoors. So actually go for a walk, or I love mountain biking, go for a mountain bike ride, go for a run, but just go for a walk to clear my head. And what I found myself doing was, there's so much going on, but there were certain decisions that needed to be made, and that could be about who we were letting go, what we had to decide that we were going to stop doing, or whatever it was. And I decided, instead of trying to be in the weeds in every single topic, that I would let certain groups of people kind of own that. Mm-hmm. And my job was to make the best decisions that only I could make, basically. And I knew that if I was tired, stressed, completely in the weeds, I couldn't make those decisions well. And so I decided that I had like a decision to own. I'd go for a 3-hour mountain bike ride, maybe listen to music, maybe not, listen to a podcast on what to do in a crisis situation, whatever it might be. And then I'd come back and basically make that decision, because I've got a clearer head. I've had the aerobic exercise, I feel better. And then I found I could make much better, clearer decisions from doing that. Obviously, not everyone can do that, or that's not everyone's way of dealing with it. But for me, and I still, literally to this day, still do that, where if I've got a big decision to make, I'll go for a bike ride or a run, and it really just helps me through. Yeah.
You mentioned already one of those decisions was letting people go.
Yep.
And I think you had 2 big layoffs, if maybe you can go into detail about that. But how did you go about this process? Because you mentioned we are now in a crisis again where companies will have to let people go.
Yep.
And in these times you really see the companies that are well led and not well led, and there's horror stories of those things, and there's actually a few stories that I heard from tour radar employees who, despite being let go, were speaking really highly. I know a lot that actually came back after the pandemic. So I think you did something very right there, and I think there's a lot to learn from that. So maybe you can share a bit how you did go through this process.
Yeah, it's a hard one to distill down quickly, but it was a lot to do with really over communicating. So I was saying I was doing board meetings and also with the leadership team every day. It was over communicating with the team in an all hands. So we did, before the pandemic, we were doing every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, an all hands meeting. And during the pandemic, when it first hit, it was every 3 days. So it was Monday, Wednesday, basically, and sometimes Friday. And it was trying to let the team know, this is as much as I know, as much as I could share, but there's a ton of uncertainty right now. And try and explain what those uncertainty elements are, so that they don't feel that they're in the dark or they're not being... They know that some of them are going to be on the end of a pretty bad decision, but at least if you could over-communicate, they could have some context of why or how that decision possibly was made. And so, yeah, we went through 2 layoffs, one in March, one in September. And the way we went about it was we had to look at, during 2019, we hired a ton of people, a lot in product engineering, data science, and as much as we wanted to keep most of those people, we didn't have anything for them to do. As we did, but we had no view of when revenue was going to come back again. Like, none. We had no idea. Was that going to be in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years? And so we had to make the decision to keep a core team that could keep the lights on, get us through survival, and let go of a ton of really good people. And that was tough, like really hard, because speaking of bureaucracy, we brought a lot of people from all over the world to Vienna, had red, white, red cards, gone through 6-month, 8-month processes to get them into Vienna, and then literally a month later, 3 months later, 6 months later, whatever, we had to let these people go. Thankfully, they all mostly found jobs in Vienna startups, which is fantastic, and there were some startups that really thrived through that time, so they got them. But I think that's what we tried to over-communicate. We tried to just basically select based on our view of the world for the next 3 to 6 months. And as soon as we started to get more view, and that's why, unfortunately, in September, even though we had Kurzarbeit's a great instrument of helping keep, the lights on. It killed morale. Like, absolutely. You've got people working 4 hours a week. How can you stay motivated if you're working 4 hours a week? And you cannot work more than that. And so that's where we made the decision, because we couldn't see any view of revenue coming in again or the situation getting better. So that's where we pushed it out and said, hey, we've got to let go of another batch of people. So, yeah, not sure if that answers your question or...
I think it gives a lot of good perspectives on a very difficult process.
Yeah.
Looking at the time,
yep.
We have to get to the end, but in the end, I think you are now pretty much back to a similar level as before. Mm-hmm. No, I think Corona is probably not over, but it's the uncertainty you mentioned has decreased, and people are traveling at least at the moment again. How do you look to the future? What is the plan there? And do you think that this experience of Corona did it prepare you now to look into this future better? Because we talked about it, there's a venture crisis going on. Do you think you're more resilient because of that now?
Absolutely, yeah. More resilient, more... we understand our business way better. I mean, we've also reinvented it. I mean, we went from being a purely B2C business to now being a platform which has B2B, and we built out a whole bunch of products. But yes, we're basically back to those levels of, like, in different markets, some more than 2019, some not yet. Like Australia was obviously in lockdown for a long time. They're bouncing back quickly now, but yeah, given what's ahead of us right now, there's still another huge amount of uncertainty. I mean, we still don't know what's happening with the war, really. The whole energy crisis, the recession, the tech, meltdown. There's a lot that we don't know the effects of. And inflation, all of us are going to start paying a lot more for stuff. And so what does that have on people's budget for spending on travel? Like, so we don't know. We're optimistic that people have been out for 2.5 years and they just want to travel. But that might mean this year is good, and then 23, maybe people are like, oh, my wallet's not full anymore. I need to now not go traveling this year. So there's so many unknowns. And I think, but what we developed also during this time, what we call a strategic framework of how we think about phases of the business. So we've got what we call the high uncertainty phase. We've got the awakening, where things are starting to show signs of improving. And we've got the new world, which is basically better than 2019. And so we're now fluctuating between those three phases, but we have a framework that's clearly to understand, to communicate to the whole company that, hey, currently we're kind of in this phase, so we're investing into product, we're investing into marketing, into customer support. That might change based on what happens. And I think that's what I feel so much more comfortable now, that we've got the framework and the tools and the experience that we can deal with it. And I hope that we don't have to do certain things in the future, but you may have to, and that's where having that experience behind you, you're much more confident in being able to deal with it and know how do you communicate, what do you have to do, all those type of things. Yeah.
But I mean, interestingly, kind of that being said, and I love the way you also kind of said you developed the framework, there seems to be quite an interesting outlook also, and I think you posted something on LinkedIn, potentially.
Yep. Potentially.
Potentially. Where it says so beautifully, tour operators are travel's last big sector ready for digital transformation. The article kind of states, the tour operator sector feels like the hotel industry of yesteryear, with billions in plain sight. And tour operator is beautifully positioned in there, essentially saying, look, there's all these operators, they're doing their thing, you're in the middle. So it seems that there's quite a few rays of sunlight coming your direction, potentially.
There's a lot. So right now, I've said it recently, I'm getting more investor and strategic outreach than I got in the last 3 years, basically. Because, yes, there is troubled times ahead, but it's a fact, this space will be digitized. It will be. So it might be in 3 years, it might be in 18 months, but it's going to be. And we're in the middle of that, and that's what we're trying to build, this ecosystem. So I think if we can show results in the B2C and continue that growth, if we can show that we are the B2B player who can be the plumbing of the entire ecosystem, that's exciting, and that's what people are interested in.
And I mean, essentially what Tour Radar does is you basically help people find the right tour setting, right? So basically people say, I would like to climb the Andes, and there's a tour where you need 10 people, and well, there's just one person who wants to do it, so you kind of put them together and point to, and that's awesome. And the thing is, people haven't been able to travel for years. They will want to travel again. And I would assume that your industry has also lost a lot of competitors who have not been able to become resilient, and now the ones, the strongest, have survived. That's an interesting outlook. But,
one thing.
It's an and. I was unsure if it was a but or an and.
No, and we're seeing some of the biggest players out there, because we talked about that a little bit backstage, about corporates and legacy type companies. They know they need to digitize too. So, I mean, one example is Flight Centre, which is one of the biggest travel agents in the world. They're in Australia, on every corner of every street. We're now working with them, providing them the technology to sell more tours through their travel agency. So they know they need to evolve and digitize, and there's a lot of opportunity there in that regard as well. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, the perspective is there. I mean, it's been tough times, it's been hard times. What's your personal North Star? What's something you look up to?
Look up to or North Star? It's very different there.
Well, what I mean is kind of like, what's your own personal emotional guide? You like a mountaineer who says, I want to be on Mount Everest one day. This is kind of where I'm going. What kind of helps you keep your direction?
I think, I mean, over the pandemic, it was also a time to reflect and do different sort of inner thinking of your purpose and what you want to achieve. And I don't know, I feel so fortunate now. I've been living over in Europe for 15, 16 years. And the experiences I've had because of travel. Oh, here we go.
Don't worry, that was interesting. That's probably a mic check going on. Resilience and stuff. Yeah. Ignore it. Focus.
No. So I feel so fortunate about that. And I feel travel has been, I guess, not accessible to everyone. And I think the way I view my North Star is, how do you make it so much more accessible that anyone can start to do that? Because I found I'm a much more understanding person today because of my experiences of living in a different place where I don't speak the language, having to deal with that, meeting travelers, realizing that I only spoke one language and people speak 7 and speak 6 or whatever it is, and that just blew my mind. But trying to open up your eyes in that regard, that's my North Star of how do I get more people experiencing this so they go home and feel a little bit more understanding when they meet people who are not like them, or why do people do this or do that? And I think that's a little bit of what I like to do. Yeah.
Marcus?
I'm just looking at the time.
So am I, actually.
Ooh, wow, okay.
Should we do the quick fire round?
Yes.
That's what I was just going to start doing. That's why we're so connected, brother. That's always good. It's just been 182 episodes. So we'll do our quick fire round, which is basically us asking you quite straightforward questions and expecting straightforward answers. But
okay.
Yeah. What's your greatest learning?
That you're always learning.
Love it.
And your biggest life hack?
Biggest life hack. I touched on it before. It's being active and being connected to the outdoors. I think if you do that, you can kind of work through so much shit that comes across your way, and you can go from being very angry, very frustrated, very confused, to actually being much calmer and being able to make better decisions on how you deal with things. Yeah.
What's your favorite book?
One that was a game changer for me, it was actually in Egypt, where I was telling before, was Brené Brown's The Power of Vulnerability.
What's your favorite product?
Favorite product? Four. I have to say, from a practical point of view, laptop.
And now, I mean, if you wake up in the middle of the night, you need to go to the bathroom and you catch your big toe right under the door.
Yep.
What's your favorite swear word?
Fuck.
Classic.
Yeah, 78% of all founders we've interviewed have stated that word is their favorite. It's combining culture, passion, and emotion. Only 2 more questions to ask.
Okay.
And that's, we'd like you to make a prediction. That's something which is highly likely, and that's totally going to happen, and we'll nail you for that one if it goes wrong. No pressure. And the other is a moonshot, which is like, you know, the great JFK who stated at the beginning of the 60s, we'll put someone on the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. So a prediction and a moonshot.
So prediction actually was interesting. It was last week or the week before. It was announced by Brian Chesky from Airbnb and Obama. They're starting to give like scholarships or funding for people to travel more and to get basically out and experience things. And this is something I had about 3 years ago, where I said there should be one day almost like a university of travel or something like that. And I think there's going to be, because we know how much experiences round people out, like, and help them in their life. And so my prediction is that there'll be, I don't know if it's going to be a travel university, but there'll be a lot more funds dedicated for people to go traveling who just can't afford it, you know, who are just stuck in a very tough, you know, position, but they still deserve to actually get out and see the world.
That's awesome. Traveling is the greatest way to learn, to be honest. But that's true.
And Moonshot, I won't say it's probably the, it's definitely not the most sustainable, and given obviously the topics that we're going through now in the world, but I actually think a moonshot is very similar to a moonshot. I feel space tourism, like, as much as people think it's not going to be a thing, I think actually will be a very big thing in the future. I mean, I just look at what SpaceX has done with those rockets. It still looks like sci-fi to me, like the way they come down and land and whatever else. But I think that and intercontinental travel, where you can be from Europe, so I could be here and then I could be having lunch in 2 hours in Sydney, I think will be possible.
Oh, I love it. I would love space tourism.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. No pressure, but like, make that work. I'd totally love to book a tour.
Yeah.
Holy shit, would you go?
Yes.
First podcast in freefall? No, in space?
I'm not sure about that.
I'm in for that. Travis, it's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you lot so much. That was fun as well. Where's the camera? Over there. Yes. Thank you very much for listening as well. There's only 2 more things to do. Number 1, if you have feedback you'd like to give it to us, podcast@austrianstartups.com or over on our Discord channel. And if you like, und wenn du Deutsch sprichst, or if you like English as well, go to our Spotify, look up for the Future Weekly podcast, and like and subscribe to us. We love that. Or you can find us on YouTube. That's right?
That's right.
That's right.
Subscribe.
And in that sense, we're done. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Over to you. Thank you.